For people who live and work near the 42nd Street Bridge.
At 6 News, Johan Marin reports since the bridge reopened last December, they've noticed some damage.
The orange barricades blocking traffic on the 42nd Street Bridge just south of I-80 are back. Crews are shutting down parts of the bridge once again for repairs.
A little scary of how they couldn't get it right the first time.
The city reconstructed the 60-year-old bridge from top to bottom. It reopened last December, but since then, those nearby have noticed some peeling.
1 or 2 foot section that started going bad on the bridge, and then it's just grown excessively since then.
Omaha Public Works Director Austin Rouser is aware of the issue. In an email, he told 6 News, quote, "Since the opening of the new 42nd Street Bridge, we have noticed some flaking of the epoxy polymer overlay, which is a surface treatment for friction on the bridge. It's very thin and didn't bond properly to the deck. We believe the contractor left some of the concrete cure on the deck prior to placing the EPO, which caused it to fail to bind. We'll be repairing as a warranty item on the bridge. And there are no safety concerns with this type of treatment unraveling." The bridge is now restricted to 1 lane of traffic for both sides of the road. Nearby business owners hope construction doesn't take too long, but are happy the work is being done.
We'd rather have them fix it now and have it completed the correct way rather than have it not work.
On your side, I'm Johan Marin, 6 News.